looking at the draft, and I know we talked a lot about Wembanyama in past trades, and I know you want to mention Scoot Henderson, but there's some buzz of Brandon Miller taking that number two, getting drafted second overall. Obviously there's off field stuff, but if the Hornets won, I think people are mentioning he's a better fit for people at home. Why is Scoot Henderson considered the better player? Even though Brandon Miller might fit the prototype that people are looking for that high in the draft.
I have Scoot number two on my board right now. To me, Wembanyama is clearly the number one prospect in this
Yeah.
draft, but to me, Scoot at number two, it's the same sort of thing where I think Scoot is clearly the second best guy in the draft. And that game against Wembanyama specifically, you could argue that's the best tape that any like non-Victor prospect has put up this year. He was outstanding in that game. He had 28 points, 9 assists, shot the ball well from three, shot the ball well from the field, had 2 steals as well. And they were absolutely dominating Wembanyama's team in the first half of that game. And Wembanyama himself, too, his overall numbers for, both of those games were fantastic. But the first half of that first game, he did have to adjust. And Scoot was the best guy on the floor for those 2 quarters and kind of showed his complete package in that game. He is obviously an explosive athlete, can get to the rim and finish, but he's also just incredibly smooth and doesn't necessarily play above the rim the whole time he glides around the rim, has all the finishes. He's a big, strong guy, can get into the lane, like bump a guy off, turn around, little fall away in the lane. He can get that shot whenever he wants. And in that game against Wembanyama, he was also creating from the three. He was knocking down his 3-point shots. He had a shot at one point in the first half where he got the switch on Wemby, did like a behind the back dribble, jab step between the legs, step back to three, drained it right over Wembanyama. Wemby, he was close too. Long arms, he was out there, contested it. It was close, but Scoot got the shot off over him. He finished in the lane over him a couple times as well. Like really attacked his body, used the rim to finish. Just incredibly crafty. And I don't think he gets the credit for the playmaker that he is. He's going to get the score first label and he's going to get compared to other score first guys. But 9 assists in that game against Wembanyama. He had a performance in the G League this year where he put up 16 assists in a game, had other double digit assist games. Just he's an incredible playmaker. His vision is really like top notch. Like he's like a legitimate like A plus playmaker, could like be a point guard on a team. Like he's gonna get this score first label, but I don't think he necessarily could do that. He's almost like LeBron-esque with his playmaking ability, where you forget that
Oh,
he's
whoa.
where you forget that he's like playmaking at times where you're like, oh, LeBron's looking to get the shot, all of a sudden the pass into the corner you didn't see coming. You're like, oh, sometimes you forget that LeBron is Magic Johnson sometimes because he'll be doing the dominant stuff, scoring,
Yeah.
bullying guys to the rim, and then he'll bust out this. Scoot can like disguise himself as this score first guy, but he's an
Hmm.
insane playmaker. Just has a ton in his bag offensively as a scorer already, and I think he showed enough throughout the season where he has enough where I think he'll develop into a really good prospect. To me, he reminds me of like John Wall, honestly, with his transition game, his playmaking, but I think he's got more like half court upside than John Wall. I think he could be a better half court player. I think he's a better half court player right now than John Wall was coming out of Kentucky potentially. And I think his playmaking goes underrated. His scoring, he's got a lot in the bag. To me, he's clearly the number two guy in this draft. And I think Charlotte, I think they're going to be strategic with the names that they float out there because Portland behind them at three, Charlotte potentially, if they're looking for a trade, they're going to want to maximize the value for that as well. So there is, I think, some planning involved here with Brandon Miller versus Scoot versus what Portland needs to do with the number three pick, trades, all that stuff involved. But I think on my board, anyways, I clearly have Scoot number two. If I was Charlotte, I would pick Scoot regardless. And I think we're going to get a lot of rumors up until then. But I do think on draft night, if Charlotte was picking, I do think it would be Scoot Henderson because I think undeniably he is the second best prospect.
Yeah, and I think it's mostly fit stuff that is mentioned when people bring up Brandon Miller. But like we mentioned, Scoot really showed up in that big moment against Victor Wembanyama. I mean, it was the main time people were watching him. And when you from people who have seen him and talked to him, it's he really does put in that work. His
Yeah.
work ethic is off the
Yeah.
charts. And it's very almost never do we hear of someone with that much talent where they're like, oh, they worked really hard, but they didn't work out unless they have injuries, which I don't. He hasn't had any injuries. You know, if you work really hard and you have that kind of talent, it's really hard to bet against that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that that's a huge part of it. And when you look at Brandon Miller to end the season, it matters. I mean, those NCAA tournament games, they do matter. He averaged 9.3 points, 2 assists, 7 rebounds, and he shot 19.5% from the field, 22 or 15% from three. And it is only 3 games. He did have a good season, but that doesn't matter. I mean, 0 points against Corpus Christi. I mean, that's got to mean something.
Mm-hmm.
He was out there for a bit. 9 points in an elimination game. So I don't think that would have happened to Scoot, to be honest. I think Scoot's drive, you can see a little bit more. He definitely attacks more. And so I definitely see why Scoot has been put above him. If not for the freakish, God that was Wembanyama,
Yeah.
it probably Scoot would be the number 1 pick. And I definitely do think Scoot should be ahead, but it's just interesting to see, Miller is starting to be creeped in there. It's a little bit of that, quarterback thing where there's always some quarterback who played on some random team and because of his tangibles and measurables, he's put up higher. But you should trust the playoff performers or the guys who perform. And I think Scoot should definitely stay at the number 2.
And I don't know if fit necessarily should be a question with him and LaMelo because again, the playmaking with Scoot is incredibly high level. It is with LaMelo. Melo's an incredibly high IQ guy. Melo's also a really good, shooter. He has shooting upside. So with Scoot's athleticism, Scoot's ability to attack on defense, I think both of those guys have pieces where their games could complement each other really well. I think you could see a backcourt with them that works. I couldn't tell you what I thought the upside of that backcourt would be if necessarily it was championship upside if that was your 1 and your 2, but I think they could fit together and play really well together. And I don't think Brandon Miller is good enough to say, hey, we need to worry about fit here. I just think Scoot's too good. It's not that Brandon Miller is not a high level prospect. He's a
Yeah.
lock top 5 guy, but Scoot is just, I think, clearly showed some stuff where he's the number 2 guy, and his regular season numbers, people are going to take those into account. He didn't necessarily shoot the ball well in the G League regular season, but if you look at the Showcase Cup, which is like a little like tournament that they do, more eyeballs are on that, single elimination games, more high pressure basketball. He was 21 points a game, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, 48% from the field, 47% from 3 in those 6 games, and shot the ball well from 3 again in that game against Wembanyama. So when it mattered, he was even like he was like overcoming his weaknesses in the biggest moment, which is the things that like the star players do when they just like pull these things out of their bag, when they're just kind of almost playing outside of themselves. He elevated his game in an incredible way. He has shown to be an incredible gamer, and the playmaking stuff is just people aren't, I think, going to discuss it enough. I think you could argue he is just one of the best playmakers in this draft. Like, Anthony Black, there are guys that are more playmaker focused and guys are going to get that playmaker label, but Scoot might be the best one of them all with his vision. He just got too many pieces, his athleticism, his size. He's going to be able to turn it up on defense. Like, he's got that Anthony Edwards mentality to him where you could see Edwards on possessions and just be like, is Anthony Edwards the best defender in the league? Crazy athletic, long, crazy quick. Like, you're going to have defensive possessions with that from Scoot. And if you're talking John Wall, and John Wall actually, elite half court player as well. So you get the transition stuff and he can be the guy in the offense and you can, in a game 7, do all the stuff. Like, this is an incredibly high level prospect. And Wembanyama himself said it. he should be the number one pick, like behind Wembanyama, the number two guy. I think the respect between those guys, a guy that high level to look at another guy and go, yeah, that's a guy that is on my level. That's a guy that hangs with me, can play like I just all the signs are there, like you said, for Scoot to be the star. Like he has all the ingredients.
Yeah, yeah. And when you watch Brandon Miller's, tape, there's not that much shot creation compared to Scoot Henderson. It is a lot of outside shooting, which was on full
Yeah.
display in the NCAA tournament, where it was just pretty much, if he's hitting his shots or not. So, and when you're picking that high, you want someone you can build a team around, someone a cornerstone, a shot creator. And so that's why we have Henderson above him. And I see you got some trades that you're cooked up. I know ESPN was doing some trades for the number one pick, getting y'all out of there in cutesy, and I know you're really against it. So, were there some for the Scoot Henderson trends that you could see ward off those other weird ones?